Hello everybody, welcome back into the Color Gemstone Academy. I'm your instructor Paul Deasy, and this is my YouTube channel, Paul Deasy Gemstones. First of all, if you're watching for the first time, or maybe you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button. It really does help me up, and even though it says subscribe, it doesn't cost you a thing. And if you want to be notified when each of these lessons will drop, just hit the notification bell or the alert button. Well, those of you who watched last week, we had a very successful episode on quartz, because somebody asked me about all the varieties of quartz. So we did quartz part 1. And that lesson was really dealing with what we call crystalline quartz. Crystalline quartz would be like this. This is a crystal of quartz. You can see that it is amethyst. There are 6 sides to this, and it's very identifiable when you look at this quartz crystal. So amethyst, citrine, colorless quartz, we covered a bunch of those. But basically quartz, all quartz, including the varieties I'm going to talk about today, have a chemical composition of silicon dioxide. Talk about that a little bit more too. Also, it has a crystal structure that is described as trigonal, and I showed you the hexagon that it was, and it's called a trigonal crystal. Well, this week we're going to learn about a type of quartz called chalcedony. Chalcedony is a mouthful. Some of you are not going to be able to spell it. Maybe a lot of you won't be able to even pronounce it, but don't worry about that. My job is to make all of these concepts very easy to understand. So this is also a quartz, but it is described as a microcrystalline quartz. More specifically, it's a polymorph of a quartz with an ingredient called mogonite. Now, what the heck does that mean? Well, you don't have to worry about that. Let me explain what a microcrystalline quartz is. We showed you this big crystal and said this is a typical crystalline quartz that you see in amethyst. When we talk about the microcrystalline quartz, imagine this crystal was so small that you needed a microscope to see and identify what that crystal structure is. Well, that's exactly what a microcrystalline quartz is. It's made up of thousands and thousands of these tiny little crystals that you would need to see under a very powerful microscope. Now, what does it mean when I say it's a polymorph? Well, this has a different crystal structure than the amethyst and the citrine we talked about. I said that was trigonal, and it looks something like this. Well, this one has something that is called monoclinic. So it's a completely different structure, and that's what a polymorph is. It means when you take the same ingredients from Mother Nature, SiO2, silicon dioxide, and when it forms under certain circumstances, either location, pressure, temperature, you get that trigonal crystal system. In other times, it forms into this monoclinic crystal system. So are they both quartz? Yes. Do they have the same chemical composition? Yes. They just happen to have formed in a different crystal structure, and that is what a polymorph is called. Okay, since I've decided this will be lesson 2 of quartz, we're going to make all of this about the varieties of the microcrystalline quartz. And they are way too numerous to name every single one. I mean, literally thousands of different varieties of microcrystalline quartz that would fall under the overall umbrella of what chalcedony is. So what we're going to do in this lesson, we're going to basically break down for you, I'm sure you've heard all of these words before: chalcedony, agate, and jasper. Chalcedony, agate, and jasper. What I'm going to do is break down what all of these words mean and what you need to know about that in the quartz family of gemstones. So first, what is agate? Agate is basically a form of chalcedony, and it is a form of chalcedony that is a translucent to semi-transparent form of chalcedony. And this is a great example. This is an agate right here. I'm going to hold this up closer. I hope you don't get much glare. It's usually a banded agate. You see how you have the dark gray, a lighter gray, a dark gray. Actually, that's druzy in the middle. Don't worry about that. That's typical of a banded agate. Here would be another example of that. This is another druzy. And you can see it's usually banded in some way. And I'll show you a couple of others. Actually, these are cards you usually get when you go to a show. See these bands that are in there? And when I take a flashlight I hope you'll be able to see this. So I just have a flashlight here, right? When I put it behind here, you see the light is passing through that stone. And if you remember a very early lesson that I did in the Colored Gemstone Academy, I talked about the 3 different levels of transparency of gemstones. So a gemstone can be transparent, like a perfect amethyst or citrine would be. It could be translucent, which is the stone I just showed you, the agate, or it can be opaque, which means no light goes through it at all. So that's going to be very important in this lesson. So that was an example of a banded agate. I'll give you another, I don't know if you'll be able to see it on this one. This is a red banded agate. And same thing, I'm going to take my handy dandy flashlight, hold it up to the camera, and you can see that is translucent. It is really showing you almost really, that's why I said almost semi-transparent, where you could almost read the newsprint if it were behind that. So there's other varieties. There's Saturn agate, which looks like this. So you see a little light in some of those bands. It'll be really not transparent, but definitely translucent. And this is a tuxedo agate I discovered in Brazil. And when you get the flashlight behind that white band, I'm not going to bore you with putting the light behind every one of them. It will shine through it. It won't shine through the dark opaque part of the black of that one. Okay, so we talked about the chalcedony. We talked about the agate. Now what about Jasper? Now where does all of that fit into this? Well, Jasper is the opaque variety of chalcedony. So again, it's going to be correct to call any of these chalcedony because that's what they are. They are a silicon dioxide that has a microcrystalline formation. So that's why it's monoclinic. That's why it's not exactly the same quartz that you see in a citrine or an amethyst, but it has the same chemical composition. Now this is actually an example of a red agate. Now I'm going to show that the light is once again on my flashlight, but now when I put it behind this, nothing, I'll try and hold it this way, nothing goes through that. You see a reflection on the top of it because it takes a nice polish, so you see the light reflecting off the top of it. But that is an example of Jasper. Now I want to give you one cautionary tale here. There's a lot of things out there that I have had over the years or bought over the years or sold over the years on the TV shows that talked about bumblebee jasper or ocean jasper and all these fancy jasper names. The one thing that you have to be careful about, bumblebee jasper isn't jasper. Ocean jasper isn't necessarily jasper. In order to be jasper, it has to have a couple of things. It has to be opaque, and it has to be silicon dioxide. Otherwise, it can't be a chalcedony, and if it can't be a chalcedony, it cannot be a jasper. So that's kind of my cautionary tale for you. But basically, it is correct to refer to all of these things that I'm talking about as chalcedony, but again, they have to have certain things, and that's what we're going to talk about next. Well, I have a new sponsor for the Colored Gemstone Academy, and it is me. Now let me explain. I had a couple of people reach out to me, sometimes through Facebook, sometimes through YouTube, asking about a good instructional book as they're getting into gemstones and wanting to learn more about it. So actually I did write a couple of books. One is called The Colored Gemstones by Paul Deasy, and it's a really good primer. It's going to be, I like to say that if you read this book, you're going to learn a lot of what you would learn at the GIA at a fraction of the cost, and you'll probably know more than most of the people behind the jewelry counters when you go visit a store. My other book is called Opals by Paul Deasy. So this is just going to be a short commercial on how to order that. So basically, if you want to get for an e-reader, if you go to Apple Books, and this is what the icon looks like, and then you click on that, you'll see, it says October Books, and you'll see in the search bar, it'll say search with a little magnifying glass. You put in my name, Paul Deasy, and then you click on that, and it'll show you the books, and it actually shows you my two books, and it also comes up weirdly with a cookbook, which has nothing to do with me. But anyway, if you click on the books, you will see that the Color Gemstone book is $9.99 as an e-reader, very, very reasonable. And the Opal book is $8.99. Now, for those of you that say, I would really rather have a physical book, because let's face it, this is designed to be a coffee table book. I have a limited number of these that I could sell. You can reach out to me on Messenger on my Facebook page, Paul Deasy Gemstones, or Paul Deasy, maybe Paul Deasy Gems. It's one of those two. And I can talk about how I can ship it out to you and how much it costs. Same thing with the Opal book. If you'd rather have a physical book, I have more of the Opal books available, but maybe only 20 of my Color Gemstone book, and I'm not going to print it again because of the high cost of printing, and then you can get it much cheaper as an ebook. Well, that's the end of my commercial, so thanks for bearing with me on that. So again, under the umbrella of Chalcedony is the agate and the jasper as well. Well, I'm going to make this very, very simple to understand the difference between what we call Chalcedony, what we call agate, and what we call jasper. In order to be Chalcedony, it is still part of the quartz family, it has two requirements. Number one, the crystal size. It has to be a microcrystalline crystal structure rather than just the big crystal structure we showed you in the clear quartz amethyst. So microcrystalline quartz, the size of the crystal, and it also has to have the physical composition, chemical composition of being silicon dioxide. So that's it, and you've got yourself Chalcedony. Now, in order to be referred to as agate, still has to be a Chalcedony. So it has to have that crystal size, again, microcrystalline structure, and it has to have the chemical composition of silicon dioxide, but it also has to be translucent to semi-transparent Chalcedony. Then, and only then, is that agate. So remember, Chalcedony, two things: crystal size, chemical composition. Then you have your agate, three things: the crystal size, the chemical composition, and has to be translucent to semi-transparent in how the light passes through it. And finally, we have the jasper. Now the jasper likewise needs three things, just like all chalcedonies. It has to be a small crystal size, microcrystalline crystals. It has to have the chemical composition of a quartz, which is silicon dioxide. And this one has to be opaque. Okay, so that means light does not pass through it, as I showed you with that red onyx a little bit earlier. All right, as I mentioned earlier, there are too many varieties of chalcedony in the quartz family to talk about all of them. By the way, you are hearing boats go by because I am outside. So if you hear that, just imagine you're on a boat here in Florida. But I'm going to tell you some of my favorite varieties. Some of them you might have heard of, some of them you might not have heard of, but they all have some interesting stories. Now, I don't have physical samples of all of them like I sometimes put up in front of the camera, but through the magic of photos that I have, I'll include that in the video that you watch. One is Carnelian. And Carnelian is the red to reddish orange variety of chalcedony. And Carnelian is kind of a famous stone for a couple of different reasons. What it was really kind of known for, it was popular in the early days in cameo and intaglio designs in like a ring, like a signet ring. And why was that? Because back then, when you had important correspondence, they would seal that correspondence with wax and then put the mark of the author of that, whether it was a king or a general, on there, so that if that seal was broken, you know that that information might have been compromised. Well, the reason that carnelian was used so commonly in that is that polished carnelian doesn't adhere readily to wax. So it was really kind of easy to put it in there and take it off and leave everything intact in the wax. So that's kind of an interesting thing about that. I love that gemstone, and most of your carnelian is not treated whatsoever. It's just that natural color. Black onyx. I know it seems like it's a very, very common gemstone, but it would be in that Chalcedony, specifically the Jasper form, because the light's not going to pass through that. That would be an opaque stone. And onyx can be really, really beautiful. And the one that I'm showing you on your screen now, I know it looks funny. You look like you can see the window in color in there because it takes such a beautiful polish. It's reflecting the light, and that light happens to be a window reflecting off of the house, and you can see it in perfect detail. I think black onyx is a beautiful and underrated stone. Don't think of that as just something for the guys to wear. Black beads are great on ladies as well. One I really like, technically is called heliotrope, which is not a very sexy name, but it's called Bloodstone. And Bloodstone is one of the alternative birthstones for the month of March. I will tell you, it's really, really difficult to get a good or a great sample of bloodstone. A great bloodstone is going to be a kind of a beautiful green color with what looks like droplets of blood on that, which comes from the very high iron content in that stone. I think it's beautiful. Don't be surprised if you find a sample that looks like this where you have to part with a pretty generous sum of money to get a really good bloodstone. I wish I could get some real affordable stuff to give you in bloodstone, but I just haven't found any that I like at an affordable price to show you. One of these, I think, really, really special forms of Jasper. Sometimes they call them landscape agate. Sometimes they call them picture Jasper. I'm going to put a couple of examples on your screen. And what they really look like is if you were out in the southwest United States and you saw kind of banded rock on the hillside, and it looks like a picture of what you were looking at. Sometimes it'll even look like there are trees. In this case, it looks like sandstone or something like that. Picture Jasper is something I'm always looking for when I go to any of the gem shows that I visit. And that's a beautiful example of that. Another one that you don't see very commonly, and I think this can be very, very special. It's mainly found in either Mexico or the southwest part of the United States, and it grows due to volcanic, relatively recent, when we say thousands of years, relatively recent volcanic activity. And it's called fire agate. I've seen some specimens of fire agate, like the one you're looking on your screen right now, that to me gives some of the lightning ridge black opal a run for its money as far as that beautiful, colorful look of that. So again, a sample like this is going to set you back a little bit, but it is still much more affordable than what you would spend for a similar black opal from the lightning ridge in Australia, or even in the Ethiopian opal in a black opal. And I think my absolute favorite, one of my favorite, I mean, obviously you've probably seen blue lace agates because I've sold them over the years. You've probably seen blue chalcedony or even purple chalcedony, and they are absolutely beautiful, and you know, they're mined all over the world, because I already told you quartz is the most plentiful gemstone on earth. But one that I always love, and I think it's really, really underrated, and when I can find it at a good price, I love to do jewelry with this. It's called chrysoprase. And chrysoprase, I want you to look at it. It's a beautiful, and this would be more the translucent to semi-transparent variety, which of course put that in the agate family. But it's mainly mined in Australia, but it is found in other places, but I think really the best comes there. And it has a nickname. You know how much I hate nicknames usually, but this one I happen to love. Sometimes they refer to chrysoprase as the Australian Imperial Jade. Now, it's not Imperial Jade, but the good news is it doesn't cost anywhere near as much as Imperial Jade, but it looks an awful lot like it, because if you've ever seen Imperial Jade, which is incredibly expensive, it's highly translucent. It looks like this color. Light will pass through it, and it's the most prized jade you can get in the world. Well, this is a much more affordable version of that. Well, we're going to wrap up all of our lessons on quartz now. I said there might be a part 3, but I really thought it was important to break down to you the different types of the chalcedony and what's the difference between chalcedony, Jasper, and agate. So I think we covered that very well. Remember, if you like what you're seeing, please hit that subscribe button. It doesn't cost you a thing, and it really does help me out. Also, tell your friends if they're wanting to learn about gems. I welcome everybody to subscribe. I don't yet have a suggestion from you guys for what to do next week, so you can hit me up with the comments on this lesson if you want me to cover something that I haven't covered yet for you. I'll be happy to do it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all next week, Saturday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Bye-bye, everybody.